you wrote a post, the best sci-fi books on space settlement for 5 books, which for anyone that doesn't know, it's kind of a website that asks, kind of people to curate lists, 5 books and different kind of topics, et cetera, issues. And so space settlements right up your alley, and things like that. So you picked 5 books: Parable of the Talents by Octavia Butler, The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal, Cibola Burn by James S.A. Corey, which is part of the science fiction series The Expanse, Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson, and The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin.
I always mess up that title too.
Which is part of the Haynes cycle. So I will give you this, Octavia Butler, incredible author, especially the real post-apocalyptic thoughts. If we want to look at what's going to happen to Parable of the Sower, Parable of the Talents. So great books. And I loved your reasoning of why to include them. Haven't the second and third author, haven't heard of that other than The Expanse, obviously. And then Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson. I recently, within the last 3 months, read that. And I'm in Green Mars now. And it is such a mind trip of how everything happened, technology, society, everything. It's literally an incredible piece of work, if you will, in this kind of direction. And then Ursula K. Le Guin, I've heard of this book, but I haven't read it. And I'm very familiar with a lot of her other stuff, especially the Earthsea series. So I won't talk about let's not talk about each one, but I guess let's talk about what each one brought to you. Why did you pick these? And then not just obviously, why didn't you pick others? You know what I mean?
Yes.
What stuck out between these? I mean, Red Mars is probably the most easiest, and then the other ones kind of are noticeable, but why these?
So first I'll say I hadn't heard of this website 5 books before I was invited to do an interview and pick 5, and I love it. You can go, there's cool. Nonfiction authors who, I write productivity books, so here are my favorite 5 favorite books about productivity, or my 5 favorite books about the history of the Roman Empire. But then there's also a lot of fiction ones as well. And so they came to me, a nonfiction author, and they said, what are your 5 favorite science fiction books about space settlement? Which was actually kind of tough because I'm a huge fan of science fiction, but I wanted to pick some that were about space settlement more than they were about aliens.
Yeah,
most are about aliens.
Good point.
In fact, I'm doing another podcast interview soon where we're going to deep dive into my favorite sci-fi book, which is about aliens and not exactly about space settlement. So it's tough to make that distinction. Okay. But that's what I was going for here. So Octavia Butler's works, first of all, fantastic, very classic. People refer to them a lot. And those 2 books are about, it starts with a teenager who invents her own religion, which I could empathize with. But the religion is about why we should colonize space. And it also is set in a very near future climate apocalypse. So I thought it was a fascinating perspective, and talks about why space is important. There's a lot of debates between the characters about whether we should be focused on space or focused on Earth, which is a relevant argument. The Expanse I had to put in there because when I made my podcast, I hadn't read or watched The Expanse. The TV show was still ongoing. And every other conversation I had, every other guest brought it up, and I was like, well, I guess I'm gonna have to watch it now. And I watched
for research purposes, Erika.
Absolutely. It was the best research I did for those books, really. And they're fantastic. And in particular, they touch on themes that I cover in my book, especially about things like labor rights, and also about the fact that people who are born and raised in low gravity might end up being unable to come back to a high gravity environment like Earth, and that could really lead to prejudices and various factions, and I thought that was really, really fascinating. Mary Robinette Kowal, who wrote the Lady Astronaut series, was one of the contributors to Reclaiming Space.
Very cool. Okay.
I invited her because I was a fan of these books.
Yep.
And she does it's sort of an alternate history where in the 1950s, right as the space program is getting going, a meteor hits DC and the world's going to end in 50, 100 years because it's not going to be habitable anymore because of all the dust. And the space program suddenly has this new purpose. This new reason is they need to be able to go and colonize other planets. And it looks at how the Mercury and Apollo programs would have been different if they had stuck with some of their original plans to really go to Moon and Mars. And what if they had included more women, which they didn't bother to do with the real world. But if you're trying to settle space, you need to include women. So that's a great, very fascinating. And Red Mars Blue Mars, Green Mars, I also read because people kept bringing it up.
Yeah, me too.
I'll say if you're a fan of The Martian, you might like Red Mars because he very much focused on how would we actually do this technologically. I think the only sci-fi technology he came up with is he expanded their lifespans a bit so that the same characters could stick around for all 3 books. Right. It's also great for fans of geology because he spends a lot of time describing the Martian landscape.
Pages about this strata and this and that. I mean, it is very visual. It is very visual and immersive. And then what about Ursula K. Le Guin? Because that's a book also I haven't been just yet, but then people have mentioned this a bunch.
Yes. So the Word for World Forest is not the most famous from the Hainish cycle, which is a series of books that you can read in any order. That includes, I think, The Left-Handed Darkness, which is probably one of her most famous books. But it's also about aliens. It's my one that really includes aliens heavily, which it's about a logging company, not even a mining company, a human logging company that goes to this planet where another sentient species lives in the forest and does really terrible things to those people and enslaves them, makes them work for them, doesn't consider them to be people. And it's about the uprising among the native people. And it's also about one thing I think is really interesting is there's a human character who's nice to the native people and kind of on their side, but really doesn't end up helping them much. And so I think it's an interesting perspective on colonialism, and there's a lot of that theme in science fiction when it comes to aliens. So I wanted to include a little bit of that in there.
So if these are books now, just that we'll play a lightning round. What's any other medium or any other kind of thing science fiction that's kind of get out to you? Space Settlement. I mean, for me, like for sci-fi, I love like Arrival because it gives like an antagonistic and a little, it's not like dystopian by any means, you know? And that's hard there's not a lot of those going around. So do you have any other maybe like, because you can't pick like Blade Runner or something like that, you know? So like,
right. Well, I have favorite sci-fi things that aren't about space.
Yeah, good point.
Is trying to narrow that down.
This is also
I will say one genre of television that I've really liked since I was a kid that is not necessarily science fiction, but it's very connected to what I'm interested in with Space Settlement, is all of the genres of, I don't know, we'll call them shipwreck stories, where a group of humans arrives in a new place and has to figure out how to build a little society for themselves because they've been shipwrecked, for example. So I really liked the early days of Survivor because I thought that's what it was going to be about. And then it was not really about that. I really liked Lost, which ended up being science fiction, but was initially about here's a bunch of people in a new place that it's a harsh environment. They have to survive together. How are they going to do it? And there's so many stories that explore that. Sometimes they're science fiction and sometimes they're not. So I like that genre as well. And I think it's applicable